Hey guys, Just Nintendo here. Obviously, I'm sure you've already watched all three of my Donkey Kong Country video essays that I've done. I did one covering the first game, the second game, and then the third game. But then I was thinking, why don't I just put them all into one, 40-minute discussion, one ultimate retrospective. So that's what I decided to do. I combined them all into one long video. If you don't want to watch it, that's great. The individual videos are obviously still there for you to watch. I hope you guys enjoy. Everybody has that one video game that has stuck with them ever since they played it for the very first time. For some people, it may be Super Mario 64, and for others, it may be in Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. But for me, that game was Donkey Kong Country. I may not have been born when this game came out, but it was still my very first video game and, in my opinion, the best. Donkey Kong Country is often hailed as one of the greatest video games that has ever been made, and for very good reason. The graphics were groundbreaking and innovative, and the gameplay was captivating and engrossing, and with the enduring legacy and the fan base that this game created, this iconic platformer has left an untouchable mark on the gaming industry as a whole. Today, I wanted to thoroughly explore this masterpiece and explain why, in my opinion, Donkey Kong Country stands as the pinnacle of gaming perfection. Getting arguably the most obvious thing out of the way first, DKC, or Donkey Kong Country, was a graphical marvel upon its release all the way back in 1994, and it was released on the SNES, the Super Nintendo. Developed by Rare, the game utilized advanced pre-rendered 3D graphics that were unprecedented at the time. The characters, Cranky Kong, Diddy Kong, and of course the man of the hour, Donkey Kong, and the environments appeared lifelike and vibrant and 3D, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible on 16-bit hardware. This breakthrough in visual fidelity set a new standard for video game graphics and showcased the potential for immersive cinematic experiences that could be had on home consoles. At its very core, Donkey Kong Country is a side-scrolling platformer that excelled in both, funny enough, simplicity and in depth. The game introduced intuitive controls that allowed players to navigate challenging levels with precision. Each level was meticulously designed to offer a blend of exploration, puzzle solving, and platforming action. The inclusion of multiple playable characters in Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong with unique abilities, such as DK's strength and Diddy's better agility, it added depth and variety to the gameplay. And I refuse to go one step further in this video without talking about the musical score by mastermind David Wise. The music of Donkey Kong Country is nothing short of legendary. David Wise absolutely crushed this score. The game's soundtrack features a blend of atmospheric tunes and insanely catchy melodies that perfectly complement the on-screen action that you're witnessing. From the upbeat DK Island Swing to the haunting and nostalgia-inducing aquatic ambience, the music enhances the game's atmosphere and has become so iconic in its own right, earning a permanent place in gaming culture. I kid you not when I say Donkey Kong Country has my most listened to video game score ever. It is absolutely timeless and perfect. Talking about the level design, Donkey Kong Country boasts some of the most memorable and meticulously crafted levels in gaming history. Each stage and world is distinct, offering unique challenges and secrets that you have to discover. The game's level design strikes a perfect balance between accessibility, complexity, and, yes, difficulty, ensuring that players of all skill levels can enjoy the experience while also providing a substantial challenge for seasoned gamers, moreover in the second game. The game's setting, Donkey Kong Island, is brought to life through lush environments, colorful characters, and detailed animations, as well as a story that you can get behind. The world of Donkey Kong Country feels cohesive and immersive, with each level contributing to a larger narrative. From dense jungles to the industrial zones and the underwater caves, the game's diverse locales kept the players engaged and eager to explore what was around the next corner. Donkey Kong Country had a unique and profound impact on the gaming landscape and the entire industry. Its success paved the way for future platformers and 3D graphics in gaming. The game's characters, such as Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, became beloved icons for Nintendo in their own right, spawning sequels, spin-offs, and merchandise. Donkey Kong Country's enduring popularity is a testament to its lasting influence on gaming culture. Beyond its main story, Donkey Kong Country offers not only a heap of bananas, but also a heap of hidden secrets, bonus levels, and collectibles to discover and collect. Players can revisit completed levels to uncover missed items or to challenge themselves to achieve higher scores and to get the 101% completion. The game's replayability is enhanced by its hidden paths and optional objectives, encouraging players to fully explore its world and to go back if you think you might have missed something. Another great thing this game has going for it is the introduction of animal companions like Rambi the Rhino, On Guard the Swordfish, and Espresso the Ostrich, each with their own special abilities that added depth to the gameplay. Players could ride these animals to access hidden areas that were previously inaccessible and defeat enemies in unique ways, enhancing the game's exploration and adding on to its replayability. Now let's talk about the boss battles, and I will be the first to admit some of them are not great. I mean, very naughty and Master Necky, I remember them both, but that's just because I've beaten the game 100,000 times. Those bosses themselves were not memorable in the least. However, there is one very memorable boss in this game, and I think you know where I'm going with this. The story of the entire game subtly builds up to you tracking down and finally finding your banana hoard. When you find it, and you have to take it back from the sinister King K. Rool. The final boss battle is exhilarating and adrenaline pumping, and it offers a perfect ending to this game, especially with the fake credits. That was perfect. And this is one of the main areas that I think Donkey Kong Country does much better than its sequel, Donkey Kong Country 2. This game's difficulty curve is expertly balanced. It's not too difficult, and it's not too easy. It gradually increases in challenge while remaining accessible to players of all skill levels. This approachability factor, combined with the depth of the gameplay, ensures that both casual and hardcore gamers can enjoy the experience without feeling overwhelmed or bored. Donkey Kong Country marked a turning point for developer Rareware, solidifying their reputation as one of the industry's leading innovators. The success of the game paved the way for future classics from the studio, including both sequels, Banjo-Kazooie, GoldenEye 007, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, further cementing their legacy in gaming history. Another side note here, fun fact, Diddy Kong was actually created by Rareware. Nintendo wanted Donkey Kong to have a sidekick, and so Rare created Diddy Kong. So, there you go. Beyond its critical acclaim and vast commercial success, Donkey Kong Country became an unprecedented cultural phenomenon, spawning an animated TV series, which, to each their own on that one, comic books, and a line of merchandise that is still going today. The game's characters and world became beloved icons in popular culture, transcending just the realm of video games. Donkey Kong Country has a dedicated fan community that I am a proud part of, that continues to create fan art, mods, speedruns, and other creative content inspired by the game. The community's passion and creativity contribute to the game's enduring legacy and ensures its relevance in contemporary gaming discussions as well. I know I've told this story before, but this game is just so special to me and I wanted to share it again. Back when I was much younger, my grandma and grandpa would often babysit us, and they had 2 Game Boy Advance SPs and a nice little collection of video games to go along with that. Guess which one was my favorite? I'm sure you probably guessed right. Thinking all the way back, this was my very first video game, and I don't think I could have chosen anything better. Ever since then, it has always interested me how these things get made with the sound design, the graphics, and everything that has to go on behind the scenes. I really can't even put into words how special this game alone as well as this entire franchise is to me. Like I said at the beginning of this video, every single person has that one game that stands above the rest. For me, obviously, it's Donkey Kong Country, and I know for my uncle, it's probably Ocarina of Time, and for a lot of people, it's Super Mario 64. There are so many, and it doesn't even matter the genre, it doesn't matter how well received they might have been, because it's special to you, and that's what makes it special. It just so happens that Donkey Kong Country is also hailed as one of the greatest games ever made, so that helps my case a bit. But reviews don't matter. If you love a game and it hits you in a certain way, that is what matters. And I actually wasn't aware of this until I really got into the Nintendo ecosystem and the community, Reddit, Twitter, and things like that. But people actually prefer the sequel, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest, more than the original, which blew my mind because I love the second game. I love Diddy's Kong Quest. It just isn't, and this could very well be the nostalgia talking, but I do prefer the first one to the second one. I love the second one. It is a near perfect sequel, but I do prefer the simplicity and just the vibe of the first game a bit more than the second one. I have a few nitpicks with the second game, but I have none for this first one. Donkey Kong Country remains a shining example of exceptional game design and innovation. Its combination of groundbreaking visuals, engaging gameplay, and memorable world building has solidified its status as one of the greatest video game achievements ever. Whether you're revisiting nostalgic memories or experiencing it for the very first time, Donkey Kong Country continues to captivate players and exemplify the essence of timeless gaming excellence. And that is why it has been, and always will be, my favorite video game ever made. Since its release, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest, or DKC2, has been hailed as one of, if not the greatest game to be released on the Super Nintendo. If you ask any group of Nintendo fans, 9 out of 10 of them will prefer Donkey Kong Country 2 over the original. However, I am the 1 out of that 10 that disagrees. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore this game, and I think that it is a perfect sequel, and it does exactly what a sequel should do in carrying on the legacy and story of any first game. But there are a couple reasons that make me prefer the original over this one, so let's get into that, and why I think this game is as timeless as it is, and what makes this game the perfect sequel. And I actually wanted to start this video with, I think, the most important thing that this game does, and that is the soundtrack. Composed, once again, by David Wise, it is widely regarded as one of, if not the best gaming soundtrack in history. The music here perfectly complements the game's atmosphere, ranging from the upbeat and adventurous Stickerbush Symphony, which is one of the most recognizable and most influential pieces that has ever been present in a video game soundtrack, to the eerie and haunting forest interlude. The quality and variety of the music here completely changes and enhances the emotional and immersive experience, making every single level's ambience unforgettable and distinct from the last. Donkey Kong Country 2 features intricate and varied level designs that offer a perfect blend of challenge and fun. Each stage is thoughtfully crafted with unique mechanics and themes, keeping the gameplay fresh and exciting. From the pirate ship decks to the haunted woods and lava-filled caves, every level introduces new elements and obstacles that require players to adapt their strategies. The creative use of environmental hazards here and platforming sequences elevates the overall experience, making each level memorable and unforgettable. And while the original Donkey Kong Country definitely had some different paths and secret rooms that you could find, Donkey Kong Country 2 places a significant emphasis on exploration and really doubles down on that. The game is packed with secrets, hidden bonus stages, and collectible items such as DK coins and Creme coins. Finding these hidden treasures often requires keen observation and skillful maneuvering, rewarding players with a sense of accomplishment. This depth of exploration adds substantial replay value and world building, as players are encouraged to revisit these levels to uncover every single secret and achieve that 102% completion. With this sequel came a very big change to the gameplay with the introduction of Dixie Kong. Her unique helicopter spin ability adds a new dimension to the gameplay. This mechanic allows for more dynamic movement and creative solutions to overcoming your platforming challenges. The synergy between Diddy and Dixie's abilities provides a balanced, fun, and engaging gameplay experience, as players can switch between the two characters on a whim to tackle different obstacles and enemies effectively. Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Conquest boasts impressive visuals, much like the first game, that pushed the limits of what was possible with the Super Nintendo. This game's art direction is exceptional, with beautifully rendered backgrounds, detailed character sprites, and smooth animations. The aesthetic of each world is distinct and richly detailed, immersing players in the diverse environments of Crocodile Isle. The visual fidelity and artistic creativity contribute significantly to the game's lasting appeal. This game strikes an excellent balance between challenge and fairness. The game gradually increases in difficulty, again much like the first one, ensuring that players are well prepared for the more demanding stages. There are plenty of them in this game. This game is significantly harder, at least in my opinion, than the original. While some levels are particularly tough, they are designed to be fair, requiring skill and practice rather than just luck. The checkpoint system and the availability of extra lives and bonuses help mitigate frustration, encouraging players to persevere, get through the stage, and improve. Now, in regards to the story, I actually preferred it this time around as opposed to the original. This game's narrative and setting create a captivating adventure. The story of having to rescue Donkey Kong from the clutches of the evil King K. Rool provides a strong motivation for us players, and the various themed worlds throughout Crocodile Isle offer a sense of progression and discovery. The detailed environments and character interactions contribute strongly to a cohesive and engaging world that draws players in. In stark contrast to the first game, Donkey Kong Country 2 features some of the most memorable and inventive boss fights in the franchise and in gaming history. Each boss encounter is uniquely designed with specific patterns and strategies required to defeat them. These battles are not only challenging, but also creatively integrate the game's mechanics, providing satisfying and climactic moments throughout this adventure. Much like the first game, the controls in DKC2 are tight and responsive, which is insanely important for a platformer. The precision in character movement allows for skillful navigation through the more complex levels. The game's mechanics, such as rolling, jumping, using animal buddies, and gliding through the air with Dixie Kong's helicopter hair, are all intuitive and finely tuned, providing a seamless and enjoyable gameplay experience, even if the game is almost 30 years old at this point. Donkey Kong Country 2 expands on the concept of animal buddies introduced in the first game, giving them more significant and varied roles this time around. Rambi the Rhino, On Guard the Swordfish, and new additions like Squitter the Spider and Rattly the Rattlesnake each bring unique abilities that are crucial for navigating specific levels and uncovering secrets. The use of animal buddies adds a strategic layer to the gameplay, as players must effectively utilize their abilities to progress and explore. This feature adds depth and variety, ensuring that gameplay remains engaging and fresh and nothing ever gets stale. Taking a step back here for a second, the environments in Donkey Kong Country 2 are not just backdrops, but they actively interact with the player. For instance, levels such as Bramble Scramble and Web Woods incorporate elements that require players to adapt their strategies dynamically. This interaction extends to various environmental features like gusts of wind, rising and falling tides, and moving platforms, which all add complexity and excitement to this platforming masterpiece. This dynamic interaction makes each level feel alive and responsive to your own actions. This game also incorporates a variety of puzzles and minigames that nicely break up the platforming action and adds another layer of engagement. These elements include finding and completing bonus stages, solving in-level puzzles, and participating in minigames hosted by characters like the one and only Swanky Kong. These activities provide a change of pace and offer rewards that aid in the main quest, adding variety and depth to the gameplay. The inclusion of these elements ensures that the game remains captivating and enjoyable from start to finish. And yes, if you are wondering, King K. Rool is back as the final boss, and he is just as awesome as he was the first time around. Donkey Kong Country 2's influence on the platforming genre and gaming as a whole cannot be overstated. It set a high standard for level design, visual presentation, musical soundtrack, and overall quality that many games strive to achieve. Its legacy is seen in the continued popularity of the Donkey Kong series and the respect that it garners within the gaming community. The innovations and quality of Donkey Kong Country 2 have inspired countless developers and remain a benchmark for excellence in game design. Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest is as good a sequel as you're gonna find. And now I'm sure you're wondering, Justin, you just talked all this praise on the game, how can you prefer the first game over this one? Well, I'll tell you how. And real quick, just to preface this, none of these are major game-breaking complaints by any stretch, just a few minor nitpicks that make me prefer the first one slightly over this one. Starting off with probably the biggest one is the character preference. I love Dixie Kong and I love Diddy Kong. I think they're both excellent characters, but this franchise, this trilogy, is called Donkey Kong Country, and the only game you can play as Donkey Kong is the first one, and I think that's just a little bit silly. I prefer playing as Donkey Kong himself, who is absent as a playable character in Donkey Kong Country 2 and Donkey Kong Country 3. The main characters in Donkey Kong Country 2, obviously Diddy and Dixie, I love both of them, but I would have preferred having at least the option to play as Donkey Kong, but I get it because the whole story of the second game is about rescuing him, so I get it, just a little nitpick. Another thing is the pacing, progression, and the difficulty. Donkey Kong Country 1's pacing and progression is a bit more balanced, at least to me. The game's difficulty curve and the way that levels introduce new mechanics, I think, is more accessible and more enjoyable for casual play. Obviously, Donkey Kong Country 2 is a more intense game, so that makes sense. Again, it's not a major game-breaking complaint that I have, just my own personal preference. And lastly is simply the nostalgia factor. Donkey Kong Country was the first game in the series, introducing players like myself to the world of Donkey Kong. With its innovative graphics and gameplay, and the memories that this game holds is unparalleled when compared to any other game that I've played. This first game holds such a special place in my heart that I don't think any other game will ever be able to fill. So, in the end, is Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest a perfect game? Almost. But is it a perfect sequel? Absolutely. Well, you guys, here we are. The grand finale to this legendary trilogy that was originally released on the Super Nintendo. We've talked about Donkey Kong Country and how it began this timeless franchise. We talked about Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest, and how it continued and expanded upon the first game's excellence, and now we find ourselves here, at the end of our journey through Donkey Kong Island. All that's left now is to dive into one of the most divisive games that Nintendo themselves ever published. Is this the epic culmination that people wanted? Or was it the anticlimax of the Super Nintendo? Let's discuss. Nintendo, and more specifically Rare, was in a really tough spot when it came to developing and releasing Donkey Kong Country 3. Not only were they just coming off of one of the most critically acclaimed games ever made in Donkey Kong Country 2, but by this point it almost felt like not really anybody cared, as sad as that sounds. Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble was released in November of 1996, a few months after the Nintendo 64 was released in September of the same year. So not only did they have to try to recreate the success and the acclaim that Donkey Kong Country 2 garnered, but they had to do so on outdated hardware. On hardware that people had already seemed to forget about. And upon writing my script and doing my research for this video, people have a lot of strong opinions on this game, more so than I ever could have imagined. With the first game, it's the first game. Everybody loves it. With the second game, it's the second game, the quote-unquote superior sequel. Everyone loves it, but with this game, it is a completely different story. You either love it, you hate it. It's insane, and I can't wait to dive into it. Before I get into the reasons, I just wanted to preface this by saying I do not love this game. I do not hate this game. This is definitely going to be a positive video essay, a positive retrospective. I do like the game. I do enjoy it. However, it does have many glaring flaws, and it is by far my least favorite in the original trilogy, so let's get into it. Starting off with some of the positives, the things that I liked about the game. The game still has incredibly engaging gameplay mechanics, much like the first two games. Donkey Kong Country 3 introduces several new gameplay mechanics that add depth and variety to the experience as you progress. The game retained the core platforming, thankfully, and the elements that made the predecessor successful while introducing new features such as Kiddy Kong's water skip, among other things. Speaking of Kiddy Kong, let's get this elephant out of the room. I do not like Kiddy Kong. I don't hate him. I'm not in the corners of the internet that wish ill upon him, that are just dedicated to hating Kiddy Kong. I don't hate him, but I definitely don't like him. He is by far my least favorite playable character in this original trilogy of games, and I wish they would have just introduced Donkey Kong back into the game. Like I said before, it's called Donkey Kong Country, and he's only playable in one of the 3 games. Kiddy Kong controls very similarly to Donkey Kong in the strength and the speed aspect, so why not just get rid of Kiddy Kong and bring DK back? Come on. One thing that I cannot fault this game on is the intricate level design. I really enjoy most of the levels in this game. The level design in Donkey Kong Country 3 is often praised, rightfully so, for its creativity and challenge, much like the first 2 original games. Each level is meticulously crafted to provide a unique experience with obstacles and puzzles and enemies that require players to fully utilize both characters' abilities. Many levels offer alternate paths and secret areas, again, much like the first 2 games, encouraging exploration and replayability. These hidden areas often contain bonus games and collectible items such as coins, making each playthrough potentially different than the last. The game also boasts a wide variety of environments, from dense forests and snowy mountains to underwater caverns and industrial zones. Again, much like the first 2 games. Each environment, however, introduces new challenges and enemies, keeping the gameplay fresh and engaging. The soundtrack in Donkey Kong Country 3 is definitely the weakest out of the original trilogy in my opinion, but it still isn't bad. The soundtrack of Donkey Kong Country 3 was composed by Evelyn Fisher this time around, who helped David Wise a bit in the first 2 games, but David Wise did not return for the 3rd game. Evelyn Fisher contributes significantly to the game's appeal with the soundtrack. The music is very atmospheric and perfectly complements the various environments and themes throughout the game. Despite the Super Nintendo being outdated by this point, they once again went the route of using the pre-rendered 3D models for the characters, and it did not disappoint. Donkey Kong Country 3 still looks great, and boasts impressive graphics and art style. Kind of going off of the graphics and art style here, the game's story and setting contribute a lot to this game's appeal. DKC3 takes place in the Northern Cremisphere, which is, in my opinion, the coolest area that we've ever had to explore. It's a new region in the Donkey Kong universe. The hub world also is so insanely cool. I love that you can go around and you can upgrade the hoverboat thing. Like, that was never a thing in the original 2 games, so having it here I thought was really nice. The game also does quite a bit more world building by introducing various NPCs such as the Brothers Bear, who offer side quests and additional narrative elements. Interacting with these characters adds depth to the game's world, makes it feel more real, and provides a break from the main platforming action. And hate me if you will, but this game features my favorite boss battles in the entire trilogy. Boss battles in Donkey Kong Country 3 are far more memorable for their design and difficulty than the other 2 games, at least again in my opinion. Each boss requires a different strategy to defeat, often involving the use of specific character abilities or environmental features. These battles are a test of players' skills, and they add a satisfying sense of accomplishment upon victory. Every single boss fight is distinct, and it requires players to adapt their strategies and learn new patterns. This variety kept me thoroughly engaged throughout my entire playthrough. And as we wrap up this section, I think it's important for me to say that this game did get very positive reviews. It wasn't until much later that people started to gain a little bit of hatred for it. And embracing that hatred, let's get into the things that did not work for me and most people. DKC3 faced a mix of criticism and disappointment from players for several reasons. One of the major points of contention, not only for myself but others, was the sheer absence of the iconic duo. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong were nowhere to be found. Their replacement with Dixie Kong and newly introduced Kiddy Kong felt like a departure from the beloved dynamic that many fans like myself cherished. Kiddy Kong in particular received mixed reactions, more so today, with some players finding him less appealing and less charismatic compared to Donkey and Diddy, which is not an opinion, it's a fact. I love Dixie Kong. She's up there with Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong as the core 3, but Kiddy Kong just is not it. He is not him. The game's difficulty balance also drew in a fair amount of criticism. While some players appreciated the challenge, others found it frustrating due to inconsistent difficulty spikes and overly complex collectible requirements throughout the game. Achieving 100% completion required finding numerous hidden items, which could be tedious and excessively challenging for some. The increased focus on water-based levels, which is a giant flaw in my opinion, and new mechanics like Elliot the Elephant's water-sucking ability received mixed feedback, with some players finding these mechanics less intuitive and enjoyable than their traditional platforming that this franchise is known for. And like I said earlier, the graphics and music were praised, but some players felt that they didn't quite live up to the standards set by its predecessors. The visual design, while still very impressive for the hardware that it was running on, it had a slightly different aesthetic that didn't really resonate with all players, and it didn't really resonate with me either. Similarly, like I said in the beginning, the soundtrack, despite being composed by Evelyn Fisher, it lacked the iconic atmospheric quality of the previous game's music. I really enjoy the musical score for this game, but it just doesn't come close to reaching the heights that the first two reached. The storyline in Donkey Kong Country 3 was seen by some as less engaging compared to its predecessors. These games have never been known for their riveting story, but this one is the worst. The absence of King K. Rool as the main antagonist in a prominent role initially, with his appearance later as Baron K. Rulenstein, it definitely lessened the narrative impact, at least for me. He has almost no presence, no aura. The introduction of Chaos as the new primary villain initially confused a lot of players and felt less impactful. Additionally, the game's release towards the end of the SNES's life cycle played a role in mixed receptions. By '96, the gaming community was beginning to shift its attention to next-generation consoles like the N64, like I said before. It overshadowed the game's release, and it was doomed from the start. The quick succession of the 3 Donkey Kong Country games on the same platform also could have led to some fatigue, with players feeling that this third installment didn't innovate enough to justify another purchase so soon after the second game had been released. A lot of people argue that this game isn't even mid or isn't even bad. It's just overshadowed by the perfection that is Donkey Kong Country 2, and I think there is some merit to that. Comparisons with Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest, often regarded as the pinnacle of the series and arguably the pinnacle of the Super Nintendo, worked to the detriment of Donkey Kong Country 3. High expectations set by the success of the previous game meant any perceived shortcomings in the third installment were magnified. As a sequel, it faced the challenge of living up to its predecessor's legacy, which was virtually impossible. And some players felt it didn't quite capture the same magic and innovation, making it feel like a step down in several regards. Adding on to this, the game's design often required players to backtrack and revisit previous areas to find hidden collectibles or complete certain tasks that you might have missed. At face value, that's a very normal thing to have to do in a platformer. But with the first 2 games, the flow of the game was never disrupted by this because these objectives were very streamlined and happened as you completed the levels. However, in this game, it disrupted the flow and felt like padding rather than meaningful content. The mini-games, while offering variety for sure, a lot of the times they felt out of place and not nearly as engaging as the main platforming levels in the game. The shift in focus from pure platforming to a mix of different gameplay styles was not universally appreciated, not by me and not by most players. With all that being said, Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble faced a vast amount of criticism for deviating from established characters, inconsistent difficulty spikes, mixed reception of new mechanics, changes in visual and musical direction, a less impactful storyline, platform fatigue, and astronomically high expectations set by its predecessor. But at the same time, the game is still a lot of fun, at least it is to me. It's beloved by a lot of people. It's still got great level design, really fun gameplay, some pretty solid music if I'm being honest. It's just disappointing. It's not a bad game. It is not a bad game at all. It was just disappointing coming off of the perfection of the first 2 games, which is completely understandable. And it introduced us to Kiddy Kong, so immediate points docked for that. Is this my least favorite of the Donkey Kong Country trilogy? Yes, it is. In my opinion, it is the weakest. However, it is still a perfectly adequate finale to this trilogy of games. And that does it for my series of video essays on the Donkey Kong Country trilogy. You guys have to let me know in the comments, what do you think of this game? I know it is by far the most divisive out of the 3 and probably out of the whole Donkey Kong Country franchise. So let me know what you think of the trilogy as a whole. thank you guys for sharing this journey with me. The channel is still growing at a very fast pace, and I'm so excited for what the future holds. Thank you guys so much for everything. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.